Okay.
We're alive.
Indeed we are. Indeed we are. Good to see you, Jon. How are you?
Likewise, I'm okay.
Good.
Surviving the heat
Surviving the heat. Yeah.
in a non-air conditioned unit, but
Ugh.
it's it's breezy, thankfully, and the trees help. And
Yeah, you've
I
got a
don't really
window
like
behind
air
you.
conditioning anyway. It's like
Yeah. Oh, well, sometimes it's necessary, I think. But
yeah. Even
yeah.
in New York, it was like when we
Oof.
used it, it was always late in the day, and
Mm-hmm.
um, I think ceiling fans are the best thing. But anyway, here we are.
Here we
So
are. Yeah.
and it's on when the heat is really high and the humidity is high. It's like those are moments when you really need to find a way to gladden the mind, which
Yes.
is this
Which,
word
yes.
we wanted to talk about today, and it shows up in a few places. I think in the teachings, the main one that comes to my mind is in the Anapanasati Sutta, the
Yes.
third tetrad, and I've always loved the word in English.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's never used. Like we don't even use I'm glad to see you, so we use it, as an adverb. But the idea of gladdening,
Mm-hmm.
making ourselves glad, or what is making us glad,
Mm-hmm.
as a verb, it's not used very much,
No.
if at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we interpret it in the context of that teaching, but also where else can it play a role in our practice?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because, I sort of did a little bit of looking around and I probably overlooked it somewhere, but I couldn't find it anywhere else other than the Anapanasati Sutta.
There was one that I found that had to do. It was like a monk who was just discouraged, and was about to go back into the lay life, and somebody said to him, "But your teacher's going to arrive. That should gladden your mind."
Okay, good.
So it was like so in that context, I'm sure that when the Buddha gave a talk, all the monks their minds were gladdened. Gladdened to be there, gladdened to be in that life, gladdened to have let go, and for me, well, in the context of the Anapanasati Sutta, it has to do with, one way that it's been interpreted is like when the mind has found unification, when the mind is collected, we naturally the mind naturally gladdens because it's not being distracted, it's not being drawn away. While at the same time, it seems like it's something we have to recognize and be gladdened by. So there's a recognition of the mind that is unified and the mind that is, and at that moment, and we can like imagine or see suttas where the Buddha is just having this very sort of gentle smile on his face as he's sitting, and in those moments you can tell this is a mind that is at ease and gladdened.
Yeah, but the interesting thing to me though is the sort of causative element there. At least the implication that you are doing something, that it's an active intention to gladden the mind,
right?
Rather than, in other words, there's sort of two ways we could do a meditation. The first way is completely, the traditional mindfulness meditation where we're trying not to interfere. We're just observing. And the other one being, say, the Brahma Viharas, where we're trying intentionally to cultivate a particular emotional feel in our minds. And at least it seems to me in the context of the Anapanasati, that is just the sutta on in and out breathing, that when we're breathing in and out, we're making an intention to make the mind glad. And of course, there are a number of ways we might consider doing that. As you mentioned, one of the ways, Thich Nhat Hanh talks about, we've talked about it before, is to have a smile on the face and bring your attention to that smile. And so through the simple action of, changing the shape of the mouth, we may help ourselves feel more glad. But it's kind of interesting because I think you're trying to make a little intervention here. At least it sounds to me like it. It is.
Yeah, I think it's both ways. I think that's what's so interesting about it. I mean, I've often said to students, bring something to mind which gladdens it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know, bring to mind those moments where the mind was at ease. Bring to mind the image of the Buddha smiling. Bring to mind a beautiful space where you were. I mean, whatever helps. And so that's the recollective aspect of mindfulness as well. In those moments, it's like, oh yeah, I remember. You know, there was that moment when the mind was at peace. I know it can happen, and I'll remember. Let me just recall that moment and let that moment. So I mean, because it falls. It's where it falls in that tetrad, right? It's the instruction of breathing in, contemplating the mind or knowing the mind, breathing out, knowing the mind, breathing in, gladdening the mind, breathing out, and then breathing in, concentrating. I'm not looking at it.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, concentrating the mind, or unifying the mind. And so it kind of can loop around, and then you sort of relate it back to the earlier tetrad about joy and happiness. What's the difference between joy, happiness, and then accept it? In this case, it is a verb, right? It is an action.
Yeah.
Or it requires some intervention, as you said. Whereas before, joy and happiness were arising and needed to be known, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, there's also an element here that I think we shouldn't overlook, which is the element of the jhanas. Because one way of interpreting a lot of the instructions in the Anapanasati Sutta have to do with potentially with trying to develop various jhanic states, deep states of meditative absorption.
Yeah, I mean, particularly the third tetrad.
Exactly.
Which is all about that. I mean, that is basically the first jhana.
Exactly.
And once you've sort of achieved that, then of course there's a gladdening of the mind. Once you've achieved that level of samadhi, one would, that would bring a smile to one's face. Or potentially, and I guess sometimes we just need a little additional support by bringing something else in.
I mean, one of the things that comes to mind is that the way that at least Lee Brasington tends to teach entrance into the first jhana is by, let's say, smiling and then paying attention to that smile, and that the attention that you pay to that smile induces or produces a feeling of gladness, and then it's the focus on the gladness that leads to the samadhi. And it looks like at least Lee is trying to sort of follow his own interpretation and an interpretation of that tetrad, and saying, okay, here's the way into the jhana is gladden the mind around something like a smile or a good recollection, whatever it happens to be, and then take that feeling of gladness and deepen it. That's at least, there's so many ways to interpret this, so you don't want to say it's one or the other, but it's at least that's one way to look at it.
But I think the point is that just to get back to your original word, intervention. There's an intervention here in a sense. A light intervention. I think in a way it could be seen in the same way that, say, Vitaka Vichara are, where you're lightly directing the attention to a particular thing. Here you're directing the attention to the smile, or you're directing the attention to something which gladdens the mind. And what happens when you do that? But then when you think about that, taking it outside of the meditation realm, and just where you bring your practice into your life, and you find yourself, I don't know, I mean, this may seem really obvious, but we forget, we find ourselves in a funk or whatever, for whatever reason, oh, the world's a mess, or this or that, and And
Lord knows it
you
is.
know, yeah, of course. But and then I actually wrote about this the other day in my weekly blog. Um, I was just talking about, oh, great, another week, another war, and how we just continually fall into these poisons of greed and delusion. And then there was a woodpecker on the tree outside the window.
Yeah, I remember. I read that. Yeah, that
And
was good.
yeah, and it was like, oh, and then there's that, right?
Mhm.
And so it's okay. How do we have to remember to do that.
Mhm.
We don't have to, but I mean that's a major component of our practice, is coming right here to what's here in front of us.
Mhm.
And otherwise, we just get too hooked.
Yeah, you've got to
Forever.
find ways. You've got to, I mean, what I would say, for myself is that I think it's so important to find ways to, you know, uh, as we say, put the phone down, right? Put the social media away, at least for a while. Put the bad news away for a
Right.
while, and or whatever it is in your life that's not working. And if that becomes impossible, then look for help. I
Yeah.
mean, really,
Well, yeah,
uh,
that's for sure.
because I think a lot of people may beat them. They may say, "I can't do that." It's too overwhelming. And you tell me to gladden my mind, I try and I can't. Um, and then you start beating yourself up. You say there's something wrong with me because I can't gladden my mind. And I think that if we find ourselves in that stage, then we should look for help. We should look for help from friends, from family, from a doctor, whoever it happens to
Right.
be,
Sure.
because there's no reason to be there, for any period of time. I mean, we should. It's not reasonable to assume that that we shouldn't make an intervention at that point. I mean, one of the things that was coming to mind with interventions is even the body scan. I mean, there's one way to look at a body scan where we're just looking at each of the parts of the body, but ordinarily what we try to do is to relax around. We look and we see if there's tension in the body, and then we try to release that tension. But that's an intervention. That's looking at something and saying, this could be better. This could be more gladdened. And we could look for some more gladdening by releasing that tension, by feeling the calm that comes with the release of that tension. Um, and that's a skillful intervention. That's a way of turning ourselves from what is, what should we say, more the poisons, the greed, hatred, and the delusion,
Yeah.
towards something
Yeah.
that's more calm and centered. And if we can't find a way to do that, that's an indication that we need help. And I think that's so important.
Yeah. I would agree, of course. Um, that was On the other hand, there are sometimes things on YouTube and, I guess, Instagram that will certainly gladden the mind,
Oh yeah, sure.
momentarily. So,
That's true too.
on the other hand, putting it down is also a way of gladdening the mind. I'm always amazed at when I do a day long and I offer to take people's phones, and then at the end of the day they don't want them back, because it's they're so happy to not have it.
Yeah.
And so yeah, there's definitely an intervention here, but again, I think it's a light intervention. It's like a little prompt.
Mhm.
And it can be a little prompt at any time during the day. What would be helpful now to gladden my mind? Oh, I know, a cup of coffee.
Exactly.
Hint, hint.
Hint, hint. Yes,
Right. So yeah, if you'd like to gladden our minds, you buy us coffee.
that's right.
And it's a little
Diggingthedharma.com.
early in the show right now, but it came up just now. So mainly because I don't have a cup
I'll put
with
the
me.
website up here on the
Yeah,
screen
yeah.
for those who are
Yeah.
diggingthedharma.com. Yes, please.
But I mean, no, but that, I mean, of course, some would say that's not particularly a healthy way to gladden the mind, just like having a glass of wine isn't necessarily a healthy way of gladdening the mind. But so at least if one intends to meditate afterward. But so it's a an intervention. It's an intervention that requires skillfulness.
Mm.
I think is something. And the other thing is that sometimes I think, especially with new meditators,
Mm.
They reach some level of calm, of tranquility, and they don't actually really acknowledge it. You know, they know that their mind is quiet, but I mean, if your mind has quieted down a bit, celebrate. You know,
Yeah.
celebrate by simply noticing, wow, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and let that smile come.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think these are all kind of key elements of this word finding its way into the suttas.
Yeah. I mean, and even, of course, just, making the decision to sit down and meditate, which we could do at any time, even for a breath, is
Yeah.
an intervention. These are all skillful interventions in life that we use to make our minds calmer and more glad, whatever you're going to say, to raise the
Gladdened.
raise
More
the mind a
gladdened.
bit, more gladdened. Yeah, it's a way of turning ourselves from the darker sides to the brighter sides, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, one could also say, in looking at right intention, the second factor in the Eightfold Path, a right intention would be to gladden the mind.
Yeah.
And if we just start there, it's like, oh yeah,
Mm-hmm.
if I act this way, if I am this way, the mind will be more at ease and therefore more gladdened. And if I do this, it's even more gladdened. And it's, we can just continually feed that element of the mind. And see what happens. I think sometimes it's really important to be more proactive.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, and there's a whole sort of dialogue, I think, in a certain sort of political space that says, we shouldn't be happy, we shouldn't be glad if things are terrible. And my reading of early Buddhism anyway, and probably a lot of Buddhism, would say that that's not true, that that's not a skillful way to approach life. It's not, being glad, the mind being glad is not to say, it's just like, the old sayings about radical acceptance.
Right.
Radical acceptance doesn't mean that we are okay with the way things are. It doesn't mean that we don't see that there are serious problems, but to tackle them the best way, it helps to gladden our minds, to give ourselves that kind of how do you want to say, not depress ourselves, and to get ourselves out of that kind of ordinary and at sometimes it's completely understandable funk that we get ourselves in,
For sure.
so that we can deal with these terrible issues in a better frame of mind, frankly.
Yeah. And as we know, there will always be problems.
Always. Yeah.
And just right now it seems like the problems are much more serious.
Yeah.
And perhaps existential to some degree,
Mm-hmm.
at least for us. But we can only do so much. So one of the things we can do is to bring a healthy attitude to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, that's exactly where this leads to, I think, this idea of gladdening. So, excuse me.
And the first noble truth being what it is, we're not going to get away from dukkha ever entirely, as long as as long as we're grasping at things. That's what we're going to fall into.
Not to say that we need to let the dukkha gladden our mind, but
right.
Although once it's recognized, that's just what it is. It's just this dukkha which has been here all along.
Mm-hmm.
And once that's recognized to some degree, it might gladden the mind or it might depress the mind, but it's in the seeing of something that we usually find freedom.
Yeah.
Or at least that's the starting point. So we have to see it first, fully, as the teaching goes. Yeah. Sorry, I'm looking over at this little stuffed bear.
We can't see the stuffed bear, but
my mind. No, I know, but it's sleeping at the moment anyway.
okay, that's good.
Funny, it's always sleeping. I wonder why. And then I have another picture right to my left of that's one of the ox herding pictures, and it's the as long as we're online, you can't see this if you're
listening to the
not
podcast.
watching,
Yeah,
but
right.
but it's those of you that know the ox herding pictures. I can't remember which number it is, but it's after the ox has been herded, and in other words, the mind has been awakened, and the man is sitting on the ox playing a flute, and heading back to town, and I had that picture just as a sidebar. I had that picture it belonged to my grandmother, who was on a world trip at one point.
Oh wow, that's cool.
And it had been sitting, and I had no idea what it was for years and years. And then I finally studied the ox herding pictures with my teacher. Oh, that's what that is. And so now it has a more special place in the heart and in the room.
Of course, yeah.
So
yeah.
Great story. Yeah. Anyway, so glad with my mind to look at that, and then these are things that help, It's like, we can look at a bodhisattva stupa and rupa, and then, that gladdens my mind,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the same. Yeah, exactly. That's one of the purposes of having a Buddha statue or a Buddha painting or whatever it might be. It's to help recollect these recollections that the Buddha himself did recommend for us to do. Because, also this is related to gratitude practice.
Sure.
Another way to gladden the mind is to try to think of things to be grateful for. And one of the things we can be grateful for is the Dharma, or the teachings of the wise people who have come before us, and pointed out things that really we should all be aware of.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And we should just be glad that we found it.
Yeah.
And that may be enough.
Yeah.
So anyway, we hope this is helpful and
gladdens your mind.
Yeah, exactly. Humor also helps. That's a good way of
Oh,
gladdening the mind. And so, I must say that, when people get stuck in these Papancha-like cycles of rumination and just continual, when you actually see it for what it is, at least when I see it for what it is, I crack up half the time.
Yeah.
Really? Again? You're going to go there again?
Yeah.
And that brings a smile to my face. So it's like for me anyway, the thing about practice is that it has allowed me to some degree to lighten up around life.
Yeah.
In general.
Not to take things too personally is also a huge thing.
And that changes everything. So
yeah.
So friends, keep at it.
Yeah, keep gladdening the mind. Yeah.
Send us your smiles.
And your questions and comments and anything else that that's on your mind. Absolutely. Whether your mind is glad or not, let us know.
All right, Doug. Okay, friends. Until next time.
Great to see you, John. Keep digging the Dharma.
Bye.